So now, with that said, we're going to go ahead and get into our data source examples. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll go ahead and say File, New, Workflow Solution for Form. And we're going to go ahead and use a query control first. Notes up here. Okay. So with our query control, the first thing we want to do is we want to assign a manager. So I'm going to go ahead and say manager here. And let's see what group. The first thing, just as an FYI, if you don't see any groups here, that means you haven't connected to SharePoint. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to go to here, and I'm going to actually connect to SharePoint. So I'm going to connect to our Pfizer training site. There's always 3 steps you want to do. You want to name your process. So you want to give it a name, such as Query Manager. You want to update your deployment profile. So you put the right site in there, and you want to update your properties window. Once all that's done, you can save your form. So we'll hit Save here. And this one, we're going to call it Query Manager. And hit Save. Alright, so let's go look at SharePoint first to make sure I can see who the managers are. We want to go to Site Actions, Site Permissions. We want to see who has access to the site. So we have Intranet Visitors here. Intranet Visitors has CEO, CFO, COO. We can definitely use those to determine who the manager is. So we have a lot of people just called manager and employee. So employee is just a regular employee, and manager is the manager, or is the manager of that employee. And then the director here is the manager of manager. So let's go see how we can make all this play with a SharePoint list. We'll show a SharePoint list to start out with. So we're going to go ahead and create a new list. And this is just going to be a custom list, and we're going to call this custom list employees. And we'll hit create. And in this custom list, we're going to create a column called employee name. And it's just going to be a single line of text. Forewarning, just as an FYI from past experience, when you're using SharePoint List as your data source, you want to primarily stick with single line of text or multiple items in a drop-down, so you can have a yes, no checkbox. But you want to stay away from person from group. You want to stay away from multiple lines of text, because sometimes they don't work out the way you intend them when you're doing your queries. Now, if it's that's as if you're querying it and comparing values. If you're just getting it, sometimes it works out. So the key tip here is to try to use single line of text as much as possible. If you can't, then you can certainly just test out selecting different column names to play around with your workflow. But I will say, person from group has been extremely difficult at some times to get it to work correctly. Then Carrie says, follow up to the collection with the control, be able to retrieve the manager as defined from Active Directory. Carrie, you're taking all my demos away today. So yes, we are going to query Active Directory as well to look at the manager. So we see within organizations that some people use Active Directory. Some people have a HRIS, or Human Resource Information System, that contains who your boss is. So we've seen different places have different things. So one client of ours stored everything inside of SAP. So we had them use the Winshuttle query product, which can run on a nightly basis. We had this product run on a nightly basis that takes all the employees from SAP and puts them into a SharePoint list, and then we ran a query on that list to see who your manager was. So that's one way using a SharePoint list. We have another client that they store all of their managers inside of Active Directory. So we're going to show you two examples today, one based on Active Directory and one based on a SharePoint list. Attila is showing up, or Attila is showing up as Carrie. Sorry. You probably signed in as Carrie, but no big deal. All right. So with that said, we have an employee name here, and we want to create a new column. We want to call this column employee login, and it's just a single line of text. We'll hit OK at the bottom. I do want to go update this. I always, as a best practice with SharePoint and past experience with Winshuttle, I do not like to have spaces in my column names. It just makes things a little bit more difficult to play with, and sometimes it doesn't play nicely. So I've learned to always, when I'm creating SharePoint columns, to not have a space. We'll go ahead and say manager name here. We want to know who the manager's name is of this employee, and we also want to know what the manager's login information is. Just like that. All right, we have all of our columns that we need, and from a simplistic standpoint, we can just go back to our employees list, and if we want to mass edit, I don't know if you guys have used Datasheet View, but it's definitely very easy to edit this information. Before I can edit this information, I want to go to the title column here and say don't require this column. By default, SharePoint requires that column out of the box. I never use that column, the title column, because it's a special column. Sometimes you get information that you don't want, especially when you're using queries and lookup controls. So I try not to use title because I could have simply renamed title to employee name, but SharePoint has title as a special value, or a special type. So I don't like to use title. I usually just ignore it. So from an employee name perspective, we'll call the employee just employee. That login information is test employee. The manager name is manager, and the manager's login information is test manager. And then we'll add manager here, test manager. We'll add director here, and we'll say test director. And we'll just add COO. We'll add COO, director, test director, COO, test COO, and last we'll add COO, test COO, and CEO, test CEO. Alright, so just added a couple employees that we can log in and play around with. Now we'll go see how we can use those inside of our workflow here. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and open up our workflow here, launch our InfoPath. We'll call this manager query using, we'll just call it manager query. We'll put any values in here. We're going to put employee name and employee login information. Now we're going to say manager name and manager login. Go ahead and add our fields to our form. Just a couple text boxes real quick. Manager name and manager login. Alright, so now we got manager login name. So we want to make sure we update these. We don't want to keep them field 1 because we want to make sure they're in our we understand what they are when we're querying it. Another best practice we use is put FRM in front of your field names, or you can put F and then employee name. Something to identify this is actually an InfoPath form field versus a SharePoint list. So you'll see when I set up my query here in a second that it's a lot easier if you can distinguish between employee name from your form and employee name from a SharePoint list. So it's hard to, if you have both your SharePoint column called employee name with no spaces and in your form you have employee name, then it's actually hard to identify which employee name you're doing. So I always put FRM, employee, and manager name in front of it. Let's see, this is FRM, employee login, employee name, manager name, and then last we want the FRM manager login. Alright, so how am I going to determine who's currently logged in? Well, we've already seen this once, but we can certainly look at it. We'll have to use it again because it's a control that's used all the time is the current user control. So we want to add a current user control, and we say whoever is logged in, then go ahead and set their full name to be in the employee's name field. So this is FRM employee name, and then set their login information to FRM employee login. We can hit apply, okay, and then we want to query SharePoint to find out who that manager is of that employee. So we're going to go ahead and use our WS query control right here. We'll call this WS manager query for Winshuttle. And then the query says what do you want to connect to? So if we're connecting to a SharePoint list, then we're going to use our connection string for Pfizer, training.Pfizer. If I'm connecting to, when you're using the query control and you're connecting to a list, you type list equals the name of your list. I believe we called it employees with an S, but I'm going to double check. We called it employees with an S. And it asks you, what do you want? The next parameter is called filter, and it says, what do you want to filter by? So we put a left bracket, filter equals, and we're going to say employee login. And by putting employee login, I can see that that's a SharePoint column because in our InfoPath we have an FRM employee. And then we say equals equals an @ symbol, and then we put our XPath expression from our form inside of brackets. So I don't have the employee login XPath right now, so I'm just going to leave it as an empty bracket. And I'm going to put semicolon, and then the next parameter is select equals. And then what do you want to select? Well, we want to select the manager name, comma, and we want to also select the manager login because we're going to be assigning that to the manager swim lane. At the bottom, we'll say run at start. We could say run when field changes and run when the employee's login changes, but we can actually run this at start. The ordinal property here gives it an order. So which way, how do you want to run this in what order? So I'm going to show you an example. The second example we have is a multi-query. So the first query gets the manager. The second query is going to go get the director and assign that to a swim lane for director. And that's what this ordinal property is going to be for. So we're going to set this to 1. We're going to set fields. And the fields we're going to set are FRM manager name equals the manager name from SharePoint. And you can see FRM means set our field. So the first property on your left is going to be the field that's inside of your form. And then the one on the right is the SharePoint column. We'll separate that by a column, or a comma. We'll put FRM manager login equal to manager login. I'll go ahead and hit OK here. I'm going to go grab my employee login XPath so I can actually search SharePoint. So I'll copy XPath. I'll go open my query control. And you see me exclusively using that copy XPath because I've been down the road where I thought I had everything spelled correctly and I've misplaced a question mark or something. So with the copy XPath, it's a lot easier just to come in here and hit Control V. Alright, we'll hit apply and OK. Now our query is set up. It's going to run. The current user is going to stick the employee name and login information in here, and then we're going to get the manager name and login information from the query. The last thing we have to do is put a workflow participant control to reassign the swim lane that we're about to create, or that we're assigning this to. So if we look back at our form here, we have a manager swim lane, and this one is called query manager. Let's change this to query SharePoint. So I think query SharePoint means a little bit more considering we're going to be querying SharePoint. So we'll put query SharePoint for the name of our form, and over here we're going to go to our workflow participant control. We'll call this WP for workflow participant. We'll call it manager for the name of the swim lane we're going to be assigning. And I'm going to click on the swim lane called, the swim lane name is called manager. The workflow definition or the name of your form is called query SharePoint. What do we want to do? We want to use a form value. Something in our form is going to give us who the manager's login information is, which is FRM manager login. So if you can remember, we use the query control to set that field, and then we're going to use this workflow participant control to replace who's currently assigned there. And if they're already assigned, we'll just say it participates. If there was multiple values being stored in this, for example, if you have a comma separated field inside of SharePoint, if there's multiple managers for one employee, you can separate it by a comma and then check this box, and then all those people would get assigned there. We'll go ahead and hit OK. I'm going to drop our last control that we haven't really solved, but it's our history control. I'm going to put this on the screen so you can see what the history control will do. We're just going to use it as a table here. Hit OK and save. Let me check our questions real quick. Okay, I think we're good. Alright, I'm going to save our InfoPath control. I'm going to go to our form now and put a manager node here called manager approval. I actually made a mistake. I'll show you what the mistake is here in a second. We'll do manager approval, and then we'll just have this as a disposition type of rejected, and then we'll make a copy of it, and we'll have this as a disposition type of approved. And normally if a manager would reject it, we'd put it into some type of loop or something, but we're going to show loops later. Then we'll show the workflow design in a separate session. This one, you can click on the swim lane, right click and say rejected. And if you click on this swim lane, since it's hooked to an approval node, we can right click and say approved. So we're just going to send it along the way. I want to, in our views, I want to create a new view, and we'll call this view 2, or we'll call this manager approval. And this one is going to be our preprocessor view. Preprocessor. Now with this preprocessor view, we're going to go and copy this view and copy it over to the manager approval view. The first thing we'll do is you'll just click up here or click anywhere and you'll see this little icon up top. It selects everything in your actual form. So we're going to go ahead and select up top, copy, and then we're going to go over to our page designer and we're going to click on our manager approval. We'll see that it has a section already there. We'll just overwrite it. So now it has all of our information. And then what we want to do is let's make the manager view everything read only. So we'll say the employee, if we had other information on here such as expense report or total PO request, if we had that information on the form, then we could make it read only as well. In this example, I'm just showing you that for a manager view, we want to say, make everything read only. This history control is on the manager view. However, this is very key. Do not have a history control on your pre-process view. And that's why it's very important to create a post-process view. We had a question earlier, if I don't create a post-process view, will Winshuttle use my default view? The answer is yes, but you can't have a history control on it. When you have a history control on your pre-processor view, your very default view, if you put a history control there, it actually starts messing with the queries in JavaScript. So we've seen some very inconsistent functionality happen when you have a history control on your default view. So we recommend that you don't have a default view and create those other separate views. So I went ahead and deleted that. I'm going to save my entire solution. We'll say File, Save Solution as, we'll call it Query SharePoint instead of Query Manager. We'll make sure we delete the Query Manager, and I'll go ahead and hit Publish. It's going to ask me where do I want to publish this to. We're going to publish it to our SharePoint site. And we have our first issue. We just got to go back to our manager view and say assign it to the internet visitors. You have a question?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question regarding that. Can we show dynamically what view to show the user based on some condition, as we do in InfoPath?
No, and actually that reminds me, I didn't set the view here. So you cannot dynamically choose what to show the user as far as a view goes. However, what we've done is we've had hidden sections within our view. So I originally designed a workflow that had about 15 different views on it, and I was maintaining all of these fields across 15 different views, and there were hundreds of fields. And I just got to a point like, this is absolutely crazy. Who wants to maintain 100 different fields on all these views? So what I did is I created one view, and then I show and hide sections based on the status that the workflow was in. So if the status was manager approval, it would show the manager section. You can also change your text boxes to say if it's manager, if it's employee, if the status is in process or manager approval, you can set a text box property as a formatting action. So on a text box, I can say new formatting if the status, we'll say we have a status column here, status equals manager approval, then to hide or disable, in this case disable, the control. So you can manipulate the views and the fields on that view based on the status of your workflow, but you cannot dynamically say, well, show them this view. If you wanted to say, based on a condition, show them this view or that view, we're not going to save this, we'll hit no. You would set up a decision node on your workflow. So you would just simply put a decision, and then based on the status, show this view, this manager approval, versus maybe this status here, same swim lane, but this one, instead of being on form view manager approval, would be on the preprocessor view. So you can do that, but I would recommend not muddying up your workflow. I'd recommend using the power of the rules and the conditional formatting on a text box to set values. Okay. Let's see if we have any more questions. Nope. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and launch our form. The first thing I got to do is sign in as a different user. So I'm going to sign in as an employee. And our employee has a form that he wants to launch called Query SharePoint. We'll hit OK. So when we query SharePoint, the current user control says store the employee's name here, store his login information here, and then go to the SharePoint list and find out who his manager is. So now we can see that our query ran successfully. We got a manager from SharePoint and a test manager. And now our workflow participant control is going to say whoever is currently assigned to the manager's swim lane reassigned to what's in this field here. You notice that I can, as the employee, change this value. It's not read-only. We set that on the manager view, so we're still looking at the preprocessor view. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Save and Route. And we got an error. So let's look at the error. The workflow participant for swim lane manager could not be found. So just taking a guess, since I renamed my form, I'm guessing my control is not correct. So let's go to my preprocessor view. Let's go to my manager, workflow participant, and see the workflow definition, this query SharePoint, the manager name, FRM manager login. Text box properties, FRM manager login. We'll copy this here. Place that there. MANGER query SharePoint. That should be okay. Participants. Place it okay there. Save our form again. We do want to go to our other manager view. I did forget to. We don't need the current user control. We don't need the query control. And we don't need the lookup control on the manager view. Since it's a read-only view, we just want the history control. So we'll go ahead and hit save there. And now, if I go back here, the last thing I want to check is to make sure I spelled my swim lane correctly. MANAGER, internet visitors, person from group. That is all correct. We'll hit save and we'll republish. Hit OK. Okay, solution was published. Let's go back here. Oh, the other, well, let's see something. Let me make sure, see how the username is brought in. I think we may have to have an lowercase manager as well. So let's go update our list real quick. It is case sensitive, so we'll say test manager, director, and this is COO. Okay, let's go back to our form view and go ahead and resubmit this form. So hit query SharePoint, Next. And we can see our lowercase manager that we updated. We can see that we can also put in that information. Hit save and route. Swimlane manager could not be found. Let's go check our deployment profile. Internet visitors. Oh, okay. This is key in inside of SharePoint. If you're, let's go check our permissions here. Let's look for somebody. Let's look for stop inheriting permissions. Okay. So now internet visitors is local here. And CEO manager is right here. Okay. And really very good. Go back to Winshuttle. Say tools. Refresh site info. Save. Publish. Overwrite. See if we can get this to work this time. Save and route. Still not finding it. So this is simply saying that it can't find it. The support information, I was going to show you this tomorrow, but we can, or on the fourth session, was debugging when you get errors. So a workflow participant for Swimlane Manager could not be found. So it's looking at our control. We're passing in the login information for Manager, but it's not finding it. So the first thing I want to do is just log in as the manager to make sure we have the correct credentials stored. So I'll sign in as a different user, choose a manager here. Let's have the manager open up the form. So the manager here, it's test underscore manager, test director. Let's see if I can route the director. That's the problem. Okay. So we have support information here, and we can see that at the bottom it says, well, go ahead and enable this in the app setting for the web.config if you want more information. So this is something we use from a debugging standpoint to figure out what's actually what's currently going wrong with our forms if we're getting errors in production. I was going to save this till our session 4, but since we're getting an error now, we can go look at it. So if I go to our inetpub www.root wss virtual directories 80, we see a web.config file here. We're going to open this with Notepad. And this will maybe something that your server admin would have to do, but when you open it with Notepad, you can type in svtrace. And right now the value is set to 0, which means don't enable tracing. We're going to set it to 2 so that we can see what's in the trace logs. We'll go ahead and go back and launch our query for SharePoint. See our information here. We'll hit save and route. Now under support information, we'll be able to go down through, and usually Winshuttle is the one that's asking, well, can you send us your information from the screen? So I'm going to go down through and wait till usually it's towards the bottom, it says manager for Swimlane manager could not be found. Task item information. So it looks as if I spelled everything correct. Let's just go double check this. Query SharePoint. Go down to here. Oh. Visitors, person, role. Copy this. Manager. That. Do one more thing. Third parameter. Just making sure that I didn't misspell something. Usually that's the end result of misspelling the workflow definition or something. So okay. Hit OK. We'll hit save. We'll try this one more time. If this doesn't work, we'll move on to our Active Directory example. Then I can have this as mine to fix before I give to you. Okay. Okay. So this one, query SharePoint here. We'll go ahead and launch this. And we'll just see if this works. Yep. Alright, I'll have to look at why that swim lane is not allowing us to reassign. But that technically should work. That's how we have most of our other controls. We're just storing it inside of that control, and then we use the workflow participant control to reassign it. Alright, we'll go ahead and move on to our next example. Let's show an example of a lookup control using SQL Server. So we're going to go to our SQL Server Management Studio. And on our SQL Server, we have a database that's called AdventureWorks. Inside of AdventureWorks, we have a bunch of tables here for the AdventureWorks product lineup. The one we're particularly going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at a table called Production Product. So we're just going to be looking at this table here. So if I select top 1,000 rows, we can see that there is information around products. AdventureWorks is just a test Microsoft database. They have product numbers, they have finished goods flag, all kinds of information, color and safety stock. All that is in this database here. So we're going to change our control around. We'll call this lookup to SQL. And we're going to delete this information here. You do not need the query or these controls. You'll notice when I delete something on the right, it doesn't delete it on this left or on the left. If I delete it on the left, it doesn't delete it on the right. So what I want to do is right click and say delete. Yes, if you don't use the control, if you don't need it anymore, we're going to delete, and we'll delete our employee information because we don't need that anymore. So this is kind of key to make sure your data source on the right, even though you deleted it on your form, it did not delete it from your data source on the right. So you want to make sure you keep your data source correct. If you don't need a field anymore, then just go back and delete it inside of here. So we're going to keep our current user control. You don't need this other field. Yes. All right. So with our lookup to SQL, we're just going to simply put a search product code here. We're going to use a lookup control, and we'll have a selected product. So our search product, we're going to put a text box on the screen. We'll make it only this big. We'll go ahead and change the control name to product number search. Properties, product underscore number search. And we're going to put a lookup control right next to the product number search. So once we choose a search, then we're going to look up against a certain database or a connection string. So we'll use our Winshuttle lookup control. If I right click on our lookup control, it sets some values. The first thing we're going to set is our data source, which is going to be a SQL Server connection string. So if I go to the top here, it says driver equals SQL Server, native client 10.0. The server is the name of the server you're connecting to, which is our test server. The database is the name of the database that we just looked at. And the trusted connection is using whoever the ShareViz admin or whoever the app pool is running under. It's going to use that account to connect to the database. So once we have that account connected to the database, the next parameter is asking which column do you want, which table do you want to go to. So we're going to go to that products table that we just looked at. The next one is we're going to display what column do you want to display when you're searching. So we'll display for the product number. The search field, we're going to use the product number search that we just added for that column. Here's our XPath. We'll copy. We want to search the product number. We want to use our like, and we'll put a wildcard at the end of our field. Search key operator. And then what do we want to set? We'll have the set field be product number, which I haven't added to the screen yet, equal to product. FRM product number equals product number, which is coming from our database. This is using SQL, so you can have, instead of a like column here, you can put an equals operator or greater than or equal to, but it's constructing. The wild card at the end is we're going to set the minimum value to be 2. We're going to show it in a pop-up, so you have to put in at least 2 characters. And then once you put in those 2 characters, we'll go ahead and display some products for you. So we'll call this product search for the title. And we'll set the initial height to be 400. So that's all we need in this lookup control to be able to query the database. We put the data source, our table that we're looking at. We're putting the column we're displaying called product number. We're doing our search for product number like, and then whatever they type into our search field called product number search. Let me hit OK here. Let's go put our text box here called FRM product search. Or product number, I mean. FRM product number. Alright, and that's it. We're going to have them type a search up here, so type a 2-digit product code. They have to at least put in 2 digits according to our lookup control. We said at a minimum you have to at least have two characters. And once you have 2 characters, you're going to click our hourglass here, and then we're going to have a pop-up window, and then we'll select the pop-up window. So this current user control and save. So we'll save this. We'll close it. We'll say file save solution as. We'll call this solution lookup to SQL. We'll delete our manager node off of here because we're not doing any routing for approval. And we'll go ahead and call this Lookup Sequel. And since this is the first time we're publishing it, we'll clear that out, save it one more time, publish, overwrite, okay. Alright, we'll see what our lookup control does for us. Okay, we have Lookup Sequel here. We'll launch this. We'll put in our product code of T. If I just put 1, we're going to get an error. You must at least have a search key of 2 characters because we specified 2 characters. Let's go ahead and put TT. This is a pop-up, so you have to allow pop-ups on the site. We'll say always allow so we don't get that error message again, since we are popping up a window. So I'm going to hit TT. And we get an error for 0 for 2 on my demos as far as working the first time. Let's look what this error says. Okay, this one is saying that the Winshuttle admin account that you're trying to access the database with doesn't have access to it, which is a very simple thing to fix. And one to explain to is we have an account called SVAdmin, which is who is your Winshuttle admin account. That's what your application is running under. So what I want to do is I want to go into my SQL server and have your SQL admins say who's ever the SV admin at your organization, you want to give them a user mapping of the AdventureWorks system, and you want to give them data reader. And you could just give them data reader because we're not writing information back to the database. But if you, for example, needed to put information back in the database, you'd have to have data reader and writer. In this case, we just have reader. Now we can see down here our SV admin. That's what the error was complaining about. So hopefully, when we open up, actually I'm 1 for 1 for demos today. We see that the search came back with a product number, and we see TT, and there's 3 of them. So once I click on TT, it's going to fill in my selected product here. If you wanted to display more information, you can display really any column that's in this field. So we have a product number here, but if you wanted to show any more information, such as the list price, you can display that in your lookup control. And that's what's so nice about lookup controls, is that you can display as much information as you want, and it just shows up across the right side. So that now that you have that information, you can say display column, we'll have it say comma list price. And save this, save, and publish. So we'll refresh our screen now. We'll put TT here, and we'll go ahead and select it. And now we're going to see product name and list price. So this is just an example of how to connect the SQL Server with a lookup control, how to put in your connection string on the right side, and then how that underline sets your form values. It is 11 o'clock, so I will leave it to you. I have one more demo that I have here, which is how to connect to Active Directory. If you want to see that, then just let me know. Display column in the form variables is right. Joe Jen, I'm not quite sure what your question is. It says display column in the form variable right. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna ask what is the difference between the display column, and now I understood after your
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
explanation.
yeah, display column is what you're in the lookup control is what's showing here, and it's coming from your SQL database. So it's wherever you're connecting to. So if I was connecting to, let's add one more lookup control real quickly. So if we wanted to connect to SharePoint and connect to our employees list, and we wanted to display that in a lookup control, if I click on data, I first have to add a connection string to my Pfizer site. So let's go ahead and add it to a connection string to Pfizer, and we'll put do. Seems like I forgot all my passwords. Employee. And, okay. There we go. So now we choose our employees list. And with the employee list, we're going to pull in employee name, the login, the manager name, and the manager information. And we'll hit next, next, finish. And then let's just go ahead and say right below this lookup, select an employee. So we'll go ahead and drop another lookup control quickly on here. We'll say the lookup control is going to be WS lookup. And put that right next to there. And for the WS lookup, what we do is put the data source, instead of being that big long connection string we use for SQL, we put the name that was inside of InfoPath. So we just call it employees. And then for our display columns is what's in our SharePoint list. So we're going to display employee name, employee login, manager name, and manager login. We're not going to do any searches. It's just simply to show you that you can display multiple values here. And we'll say select employee and hit. We'll go ahead and check this box here that says allow multiple selections. So if you wanted to allow multiple people to be selected, you could do that. And you can append to a repeating group. So let's just say group. We'll go ahead and add a repeating group to our element here. We'll insert a repeating table real quick. Repeating table. And we'll say it's just, say 4 columns. We'll field 9, 10, 11, and 12. So I'm just going to go to our lookup control here and say go ahead and allow multiple people to be selected, and for field 9 we're going to set that equal to employee name. For field 10, set that equal to employee login. Field 11, set that equal to manager name. And for field 12, set that equal to manager login. So this multi-selection is going to allow us to have multiple people selected. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK here. Hopefully I spelled everything correctly. We'll save it. We'll save it and publish. If we refresh our screen, The lookup control for select an employee should look a little bit different. I must have misspelled a name. Let's look at the error message real quick and see which name I misspelled. Column name employee login. I did not spell employee login correctly. Let's go fix that real quick. So some errors are really simple to see what the problem is. So in our case, my spelling and typing wasn't correct. It's employee login. So if I go look here, I put EMP without two E's, employee, P-L-O-Y-E-E, login. So that should be okay. We'll hit assign, okay. Save this one more time. The other tip I have for you is to do this stuff in multiple stages. Get one column working, and then after you get one column working, then move on to the next column. So you don't get problems like this where you're wondering what thing that I add to my form caused this form not to work anymore. So it's a little bit easier to do it in steps. And what other column? Manager. I forgot an A within manager login. Rough day for typing and spelling. There we go. We'll go back to our lookup control. We'll go to manager login, which is luckily the last field that we have to worry about. M-A-N-A-G-E-R. We'll redeploy one more time, save and publish, overwriting our solution. And our solutions should work this time. Okay, we're going to go ahead and click on select an employee. We have one manager. I misspelled manager. Live demonstrations are sometimes difficult because you work so fast that you do not spell things correctly. So we're going to do M-A-N-A-G-E-R for manager name. Manager login is correct there. One more time. So we've seen a query control connected to a SharePoint list to go get data. Now this is a lookup control connected to a SharePoint list that allows you to see multiple information. Now by using our multi-selection here, we can select all of our fields, hit set lookup fields, and then that would put it in the underlying repeating table down at the bottom. But since I'm clicking on it and it's not setting in, I'm guessing that I have something spelled incorrectly there as well. So I won't worry about that. I'll go ahead and move on to our last demo, which is connected to Active Directory.